Welcome to another Leadership and Legal Live. It's been about 10 months or so since we've done one of these things. My name's Steve Lois and my co-host, James Reed.
Happy to be here. It's been too long.
It's like we've been hanging out, but we haven't had some of these conversations that the public has been asking us for.
Well, it's the right time to develop the healthy habits and start a new year.
Back to it. So this is one of these topics. For those of you that, if this is your first time watching this, James and I and other guests that we've had on the show, we really kind of drill in on some of these more difficult topics. We've talked a lot about working from home. We've talked about the racial issues that are going on. And this is kind of an all-encompassing topic that I think is a big problem. And we've been talking about this.
I think this summarizes what we've been all about, is agreeing to disagree and creating conflict to make us better.
Yeah, so when we talk about difficult conversations, it's not just the racial stuff. We've talked about that, and it's an important one. But think about things like a team member's underperformance. That's an issue. Termination of somebody, harassment of somebody. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Office gossip.
How do you deal with some of this stuff? And it just seems, and we've got some folks here in the room. Leah made this comment just a few minutes ago, that it seems like everybody's on edge and almost afraid to have the conversation.
I would completely agree. I think a little slight comment sets people off more than ever has before. And I think with the power shift to employees, they're starting to get a little bit more comfortable to articulate how they feel because they can get a job somewhere else.
It's like they can go. See ya.
Yep.
But leaders have a role in this. So if you're watching this, a couple of things that I'll point out is if you've got some comments or you've got some questions, whether you're on Zoom, whether you're on Facebook, or whether you're on LinkedIn, put them in there. We'll try to address your specific question, your specific comment and scenario, both from a legal perspective as well as from a leadership perspective. So let's kind of dig in on this, James. So let's start with the legal side. That's your expertise. You've got the leadership stuff too, but from the legal perspective, what do you see happening from a legal perspective that is causing more challenges when needing to have a difficult conversation with somebody on your team?
Sure. So as high as 95% of discrimination claims end up getting dismissed without evidence supporting the discrimination. So knowing that statistic, that means that 95% of employees at least felt they were discriminated against and didn't know why they were being treated differently. I don't think 95% of employees are extorting America. Sure. I think that it's bad management making an employee feel singled out or demoted or fired or disciplined in an unfair manner. And why don't these employees understand why, and why don't the employers have any evidence that they had a conversation as to a performance-related issue?
So let's approach that one right there. So things like that are happening, underperformance, all these things that are happening. Do you feel that leaders are not addressing those items when they should, when they first come up, and why do you think that is?
I think that leaders in general want to be liked and followed, so we can break that down.
Yeah.
But second, I think leaders, like everyone, is looking for the easy button.
The Staples button.
And if you notice someone didn't have the training they needed, they're not up to speed, you're just going to pick someone that is up to speed and start using them. And when that employee all of a sudden is getting less work or no work, in your mind, you were just giving it to who was most capable. In their mind, you didn't invest in them, and they think they're discriminated against.
Do you think it's really because leaders want to be liked, or do they fear having that? You're my attorney, right? And I don't like the way you handled it. Let's just say that's never happened, but let's just say that was to happen. Yep. And I avoid it. Is it because I'm afraid of you liking me, or is it because I'm afraid of your reaction, or is it because something else? I mean, what do you think is? Do you think it's really because of fear of being liked?
I think it's rare to have it be one obvious answer, right? So it's multiple things. I've noticed when I do sexual harassment training that some people will not even make eye contact with employees anymore, or afraid to say good morning because they're flirting with somebody, and that's not at all the takeaway you should receive. You should be self-aware and comfortable, communicating with your employees, and I think they're looking for, they're not coached, they're not trained.
And I'm going to take this from the leadership side, but I'm curious on the legal side as well. One of the things that I've experienced is that when there's a conflict between two folks, whether it's two coworkers, whether it's myself and one of my team members, one of my managers, one of their team members, and I see this with our clients all the time, it's not an issue of the facts because they're both looking at the same facts. It's kind of their interpretation of those facts. And I heard this quote: "They're not about what the contract states, but about what the contract means from a legal perspective." Relate those two together. How do you see that?
So there's a legal strategy where sometimes you're slightly vague in your contract provision because you knew if you addressed it head on and fully gave examples, someone might renegotiate and tweak a couple words in that contract. So sometimes people with less power are vague in how they create their policies or their contracts, and people with more power are often precise and specific. So I think people intentionally are sometimes vague, or they don't want to be so narrow that they're missing other points and concepts, so the lawyers draft it very broadly.
In relation to this idea of conflict between two people, the perspective that I keep seeing is that the facts are the facts are the facts, but because of the life experience of one person, they view the facts through their context. The life experience of another person views those facts through their context, and it causes this disconnect.
There is no doubt that's true, but I want to take one step back. I think most companies aren't able to get to the facts are the facts are the facts. What I'm seeing a huge trend of is the gossip hearsay that's completely non-factual, where someone either has an unconscious bias or a perception. Let's say someone comes in to me and says, "I think Steve didn't say good morning to me today. He said good morning to someone else. He must be mad about me at something." And then let's say that manager gets that information, the manager might be like, "Okay, Steve's like that to me too, just ignore it." And then you don't say good morning again to that person. They start gossiping to other people. "Did he say good morning to you?" Next thing you know, that employee feels like they're being discriminated against. And those managers are all aware of the conflict between you and them. The managers do nothing with that information. They think being the sympathetic ear, almost agreeing with the employee that Steve's rude to everybody. Now there's this perception that you're rude, you're a bad leader, and the manager did nothing to solve the problem.
You just brought up a key word that I see from a leadership perspective continues to cause problems: sympathy. What's the difference from your legal perspective or from your own personal perspective? The difference between sympathy and empathy.
Wow, I was thinking empathy when you said sympathy. So I want to hear, I think empathy is maybe trying to relate, and sympathy is more acknowledging the issue.
I look at it a little bit different. This is where I think leaders really kind of get, when it comes to not dealing with some of these issues or the way they think they're dealing with some of these tough conversations. Sympathy is kind of like, "Oh man, I feel your pain. It's a really crappy situation that you're in." And to me, that's adding gas to the fire. As a leader, if you're too sympathetic, I think we can take a bad situation and make it worse.
Right.
Empathy to me is more, "Hey, I understand what you're going through now. What's the next steps? Where are we trying to go with this?" And it's not feeling sorry for that person, but helping them solve the problem is almost my view of this whole thing.
That's my training, is don't bring a problem, they bring the solution. What would you like to happen? Would you want them to say good morning to everyone?
Yeah.
And I think it still has to be natural. I notice people that get the training on saying good morning even at common CEO groups, all of a sudden someone says good morning, James Reed, and then it felt awkward and not sincere, and then you can't trust somebody when they're being fake.
Sure. The intention is part of the issue there. You can sometimes pick up on it. So let's say I'm a leader and I have a problem with one of my team members who are here in the room, David or Leah.
Sure.
The approach from your perspective, we have the facts. We believe we have the facts. How should I approach that situation?
Great question. So the tool that I've learned through the years is always taking accountability regardless if other people should be accountable.
What do you mean?
So it's called the I message.
Yep.
And never start the conversation with giving someone the finger. Nobody wants the finger. So start with the thumb. Start with I and say the word, "I feel that I could have trained us better, or I could have communicated sooner. I feel that we can do better." And by saying "I," you're taking accountability, which you need to do as a leader. Leaders need to be accountable for team results, regardless if they believe they dropped the ball or not. Coaches get fired for bad team performance.
Sure.
And from there, that opens up the avenue for the employee to say, "You're right, I could have also came to you sooner," because I feel like when you attack somebody, they get defensive and deny the facts, deny the allegations, say you're wrong, you're misinterpreting, and it's not solving the problem. You're instead flaming the fire by being
more gasoline.
More gasoline
on the fire. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I do think it's tough for some people to quote unquote take the blame when they feel that the other person is to blame, right? I mean, let's think about the dynamic of two people that don't agree on something. It's your fault, James, and you're thinking it's my fault. And then for one of us to step back and say, I think I could have done better. How do you convince people to do that? Because it's not as easy as what you just described.
No, it's way harder. So I think that going back to the facts, I think most people still disagree on the facts. So they say opinion, someone's rude, bully, aggressive, demeaning, condescending. That doesn't tell me any facts.
Yeah.
And we may disagree with the interpretation if we saw that on video. So I try to start with, like, let's stick to the facts. What are the 7 W's? Who, what, where, when, why, witnesses.
That's your legal training.
Start the legal training. But then from there, I think that we need to be very comfortable, focusing on how we feel. So going back to your empathy, I feel that your feelings are real. And, your feelings, even if they're not rational, it's how you feel, and that can create more trust and breaking down barriers by actually being a vulnerable leader and talking about your feelings.
I had a recent situation. We were talking about sharing descriptions, and every company has this happen. This is not just within one of our organizations, but I had a recent situation where two leaders really had a disagreement on a particular situation, and both were viewing the other one as having a negative intention in the conversation. It wasn't the case in either situation, right? But it was almost like it's, you wanted this and that's not right, and the other ones, you wanted this and that's not right. I mean, it seems to me that that's our natural bent.
For sure, that's our natural bent, and it's getting worse with remote work and COVID because now people are communicating by chat or email.
Yeah.
And imagine how those emails are misinterpreted. Someone said the tone, how do you know someone's tone necessarily from an email if someone isn't doing all capital letters?
Yeah, I've tried to, and I don't do this exceptionally well. I think all of us probably get angry when we shouldn't get angry, and we avoid that conversation. But I've tried to take this approach of what I call, it's similar to what you were just describing, facts, feelings, focus, fruit. Okay, I have to have a hard conversation with you or Leah or whoever and say, okay, here's the facts as I see them, but I can't see them from your perspective, right?
Right.
So I may feel like I was dissed, but I really want to understand how you feel as well. So let's deal with the facts. Let's see how we both view them. Let's acknowledge that we both feel a little bit differently, but then we've got focus and fruit. Focus is, what do we want to do with this? Because it just seems like so often we get into a difficult conversation and we don't even have a purpose of what we're trying to solve, right? It's like, what do we want the outcome of the difficult conversation to be? Retribution, which I think sometimes comes up, right? And then how are we actually going to get there? And if we don't follow some kind of structure, your W's, the 4 F's, and so on, I think we get into a lot of trouble as leaders when we're dealing with some of these tough conversations.
You're absolutely right. That's why every company needs to have incident reports and tools where they focused on the solution focused and getting there together as a team, and maybe having, instead of having a PIP, just be, hey, you subordinate do all these things, maybe we together can check in and improve things and hold each other accountable.
So in the legal field, you guys do a lot of what I refer to as pre-framing the conversation.
You're right. We set up, how would you document something? What questions do you ask? Almost like a deposition. How would you intake this information? And then once you receive it, what do you do with it or not do with it? And that's where companies get in trouble. They think just hearing it is the solution, or documenting it is the HR document.
That's not the solution.
That's not the solution whatsoever. Maybe you're minimizing some lawsuit by saying you at least did something, but I think you're losing the opportunity to fix the problem.
If you document it and do nothing with it, what happens to those two parties that are involved in it?
Well, they both feel that now they have a strike against them.
Yeah.
And they've been and now they're trying to say, how do I get revenge on my employer for building a file against me instead of helping me solve a problem?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm the more difficult in this particular area, because my past, if something was happening, I was going to have a tough conversation with you, I'd say, James, damn it, I can't believe you did. That would have been my approach years ago, which obviously does not work. So thinking about it from James, put my thumb at me, I want to figure out what's going on here. Keep going with that conversation, because you kind of started it. Keep going with that conversation.
I did, and there's one thought that I want to get out as we continue that conversation is, when I talk about how I feel, are we talking about what's best for like our immediate team? Let's say it's the marketing department. Does that marketing leader feel how to make their inner office micro team happy, or are they doing what's best for the overall organization? And I think most managers get it wrong and just focus on the micro team who they see daily and don't always have the vision of what's best for the entire organization by sometimes only promoting just one team. All these other teams are getting neglected and feeling left out and what's best for your overall culture. But going back to, the I message and how you feel, this isn't something that you just feel angry, have emotions, and instead of pounding your fist, you say, Steve, I feel like we could have handled that better. What do you think? That's almost continuing the emotion and the anger and the fight. This is something you almost set up 24 hours in advance, and you actually draft it, on paper. There's an iMessage tool, and it's like, how do I feel? What are the facts that we can agree on that aren't, disputed? And what steps do I think we can take to get to the next level? And what does the other party propose to make us better and get it to the next level? And if you ask questions as opposed to point fingers either way, that gives you more opportunity to solve problems.
Yeah, I think the asking questions is the key, because then it gives you some information. It gives you perspective on why they felt the way they did, why they're continuing to feel the way they did. I had this situation happen. I'm going to put myself in the center of this, right? I went to one of my team members in the last couple of months to have a difficult conversation around underperformance, right? And I didn't yell or scream or anything along those lines. But what came out of it after asking some questions of this particular individual is that individual didn't even know what was expected of them. So if I had pointed the thumb back at me first, it would have been a completely different conversation. And I know better than this, but I went in kind of with the, how are you going to fix it? Which I think is common, and most leaders are actually kind of taught that by not being taught the other way.
Right.
And I could have really messed that situation up had I not finally caught myself in this and went, oh man, the whole conflict, yes, there was an underperformance based on what I thought I had communicated, but in retrospect had never communicated in terms of what that performance level had to be.
No, that's a great point. So you raise other tools every company needs. So I think every single year, you need to update your job descriptions.
And around expectations.
On expectations.
Okay.
I think that, and when you're doing a performance review, I wouldn't just say I'm grading you employee based on my expectations of you. I would ask that employee, is there anything you're doing outside of your job description that you should be, valued on or appreciated for, and give them a chance to articulate what other value add they have, and then add that to their job description, because maybe they want to be acknowledged and appreciated and know they're getting noticed for going above and beyond.
So you really, let's avoid the whole conflict thing in the beginning by being clear in that particular situation as to what's expected, so we don't have the issues of underperformance.
And I think all employees want the, I call it the Disney World path to, promotion. And, we're not always going to promise someone, the Disney World experience, but I think that we do have a duty to continue challenging them and setting goals and helping, be aligned in what we can do to promote them and maybe give them more comp responsibility and, appreciation at work.
So let's talk about other issues that we have to address.
Yes.
We were talking a lot about kind of underperformance and some of the approaches to dealing with that, but we also have potential discrimination things, and we've talked about the racial discrimination, but even gender discrimination and other things. And if somebody brings in a picture of a lady in a bathing suit and pastes the head of one of the other employees on that, you got to have a conversation. How do you address something like that, and is it different when you were then from addressing an underperformance issue with that employee who did that?
I would say yes, it is different. I think that you want to have employees able to have some level of fun and some level of banter and some level of being themselves. But I think step one is to look at your handbook and your policies and your playbook, and employees need training and education that you can't say any jokes based on, height, weight, sex, marital status, any of those things. So you don't necessarily have to fire them and give them a PIP or have a formal write-up. You might just remind them of the policy. Or if you think it's going on with other people, remind the company, hey, we don't want to say any jokes based on any protected class. Here's our policy, and do a company-wide email, and you can approach it more through training as opposed to a one-on-one direct situation.
And if that doesn't work, it happens again, and you got to have that one-on-one situation. How do you approach that?
So I don't like to put my escalation procedures in the employee handbook,
Okay.
because then employees will say, hey, you skipped a step, boss.
You did this, you didn't do this. Yeah.
So, but
okay.
you may want to have a separate meeting with management, maybe a management playbook, and say, if things need to get escalated, here's where you bring in HR, here's where you bring in a formal write-up, or maybe you make them attend all of our legal and leadership trainings for the past year as a way to make them more aware of their conduct.
So another one that came up that we actually I got messaged on. So when I first reached out to you and said, hey, let's do one of these on these difficult conversations, and we actually put it in one of our teaser social medias, and it was, hey, I'm not going to work with that person because they're a Democrat or a Republican. What the hell do you do with that?
So
And this is a real situation, by the way.
Oh, it is real. I see a lot of that at work right now, and I think that you approach it through the DE&I angle. Hey, in order to make us our best selves, we have to have people that agree to disagree, and maybe we're not going to change our mind, but at least hearing your point of view will allow us to zone in on maybe how we can improve our point of view, and maybe we can have some level of compromise along the way. But the whole definition of DE&I is welcoming people that have different points of view and different beliefs. And if you are telling me that you won't work with a Republican or Democrat, are you saying you're completely against DE&I and you want just twins of yourself here and nothing else?
Well, I think that's the issue. So the person that brought that question up to me, I went through and asked a number of questions, and it really was about, okay, why do you believe that? Why do you think that that's a bad thing for you? By the time the conversation was over, that particular individual kind of resigned themselves to the fact of that was stupid. So, and it was done through questions. Why do you believe that? What's your experience been as a result of that? And I think that diffuses a lot of these difficult conversations before they get way out of control. As you said, asking the questions.
I think that's a great tool. I think, though, putting aside leadership and putting aside legal for a moment, I also try to always wear the realist hat. And I think that employees, going back to loving Jerry Springer and all the drama and all the action in the world, I think employees crave that, or at least enjoy the gossip to an extent. And I feel that companies are not doing a good enough job to help protect employees' reputation. I think that...
Really?
So I think gossip is, this person smells, this person did that, believes it, and then all of a sudden the waterfall effect of gossip, everyone might disrespect a leader all of a sudden and not trust them, not follow them. And I think a lot of leaders might even talk bad about the CEO because they became leader by working hard or being good at sales, and I feel like nobody fully has a clear policy on how to minimize the gossip in the company. So what I recommend, and I want to get your point on this, is let's say that Leah is gossiping about another employee,
Which she would never do.
which you would never do. Should she go directly to you, or would you as a leader, would you encourage her, hey, before you come to me, why don't you talk to that person first and see if you have a misunderstanding and try to resolve it?
I encourage the team keeping the team accountable first. Always have.
Yep.
Because if they always are running to the coach, so to speak, or always running to mom and dad, I think that creates even more potential long-term conflict. You went to mom.
Exactly.
You went to the boss. I can't believe you did that. Do you know what that's going to do in terms of the way they look at me? I would encourage those two coming together if they can.
And I love that. And I feel like HR is getting the reputation of, the negative police. We're just here to document you. And
I'm going to take your statement. I'm going to take your statement. I'm going to take your statement all independently.
Yep, that's right. And there's also a perception that HR is just going to agree with the CEO no matter what, and is not even an independent party.
It's interesting you bring up this point, because this is around these difficult conversations. And when I think about the difficult conversations that I have to have, if they're petty difficult conversations, It means I haven't really created an environment in my organization where people are going to each other to deal with it. And I think it's the art of teaching them how to have a quote unquote difficult conversation, asking questions, not making assumptions about the intent of the other person in that particular situation. But if I'm dealing with some of that petty stuff, I got a problem that's bigger, that's deeper than just dealing with difficult situations. It's teaching the team to deal with those situations.
I think that's the best takeaway I think we need to get from here. And although I'm seeing it's not that simple, what if there's 30 super small things?
Oh yeah.
You know, what do you do then? Like, I would almost hold that manager accountable. Why did you wait until there was 30? You know, why don't we have an opportunity to solve them, you know, early on?
Yeah, and then it's a question of did they even pay attention to them? There's a whole nother kind of plan of attack around that kind of stuff. Go ahead.
Oh, my last question was the timing.
Yeah.
I feel that, you know, what, in your opinion, when is something stale? Like, I would be annoyed if someone came to me about something I did a year ago. Like,
Yeah.
you know, when is a fresh start? When's something too stale to address?
I mean, I think it needs to be addressed immediately, assuming that you've given yourself enough time to think through how you're going to approach that situation. Because I think, at least for me, if you bring something to me and it needs to be addressed right away, I may go in it just to try to fix it and cause a bigger issue. So I'm at least going to take a step back and go through some of the tools you have, some of the tools that I've talked about to say, okay, what's my intent in addressing this situation? But then it's got to be done immediately. If you wait 3, 4, 5 months and then you bring it up again, why didn't you, to your point, why didn't you address it 3, 4, 5 months ago? You're bringing up stale stuff. As the leader, I'd say, if you didn't bring it up then, don't bring it up now.
It's like when you do an evaluation, they shouldn't have many surprises on it.
Never should have surprises.
Right.
There shouldn't have to be a difficult conversation around a performance appraisal or performance evaluation, because you should be having that conversation on an ongoing basis. So nothing catches them off left field.
That's right. And even if you, as CEO, have this, do you have that written down somewhere where everyone knows it? Like, I think HR needs to help these CEOs and executives create policies on how to resolve conflict and deal with things head on.
Yeah, there was somebody said this to me. This is in the past week or so, as I was having conversations with others around how do you approach some of these difficult conversations. And this one individual, she's a CFO here locally, and she says, "Here's what I know about myself and about the other person. I have my story of what happened. They have their story of what happened. I need to look at it from the mediator's perspective, and look at it without emotion, and which is." Almost impossible. Anybody who's watching this is saying, "Shit, crap, you can't do that." Right. It's like, how do you? But she's a little more analytical, being the CFO, and she's like, "I feel like this. I know that person feels like this, but what the heck's really going on? What's that third story? Because the truth is somewhere in the middle." And she's trained herself to do that, and you can see it in the results of her team.
That's very interesting. You know, I would challenge that perspective, because although I agree that a mediator, judge, from a legal standpoint, you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing that what I can do with someone to get the results, I have to change my approach a little bit with someone else to get the results. And I can't just focus on, you know, what would a normal person respond to with a fair reaction. Almost, how do I get the most out of them? And maybe someone else doesn't trust me as much, for maybe they have their own personal reasons.
Yeah.
And so don't focus on how an average person trusts me. How can I get this person to trust me enough to, you know, get the results I'm looking for?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I guess I just think about it in terms of kind of my day-to-day interaction. Even, I'm going to use myself as an example again, because we're all passionate about our own opinions of stuff, just naturally, right? You are, I am,
Yep.
Leah, David. Everybody's kind of passionate about it. And we don't always, it goes back to our original conversation about asking questions about how you think about it, why you think about it, and so on. But if I first approach it with kind of the facts again, right? Take out my feelings, take out what I believe, take out all this, and really what's going on. For me, at least, it's calmed me down a little bit so that I can have a more constructive conversation. That's kind of one piece. The other piece that again, I keep putting myself in the middle of this, but I'm gonna do it.
That's great.
Is and I mentioned it earlier. What's my intent in the conversation? And I don't know if you've ever caught yourself, if you're a leader and you had a situation where you had to have one of these difficult conversations with somebody. It's like, is your intent really just to punish them, or is your intent really to show them that course of action, regardless of the why, is maybe not the right thing? And if we're honest about ourselves as leaders, sometimes it's like, I just want to punish the son of a gun because it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Have you ever experienced that?
I have experienced that, and I actually get asked sometimes. I ask myself, am I coming at from emotion, or am I coming for what's best?
Yeah.
For the team? And I've had to stop myself several times because my first instinct is to deal with it right away.
Sure.
And sometimes that emotion can get you the results, but I think you really got to think what's the best approach for the team.
Yeah, it's not just about fixing it, but understand why it's happening. Because if I just want to fix the immediate situation, it means I'm punishing that person. If I really want to understand what's going on, I want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it's not about me just understanding what went on, it's about helping them understand what really went on.
A bigger challenge I'm seeing is this concept of perception is reality regardless if it's true. And that's challenging. But let's say someone has a false perception. Do you have that one-on-one, you approach it with them? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of, so I was reading a book on difficult conversations,
Yes.
right? Because I love to get all that stuff.
Yep.
And in there it said that there could be more than one true reality of a situation. And I think there's examples of that out there that it could be. But if you know that that other position is not true, my focus is on understanding why do they have the perception in the first place. I'm not going to change their mind right now. And if I go in with, I'm going to change their mind because I know it's true and what their perception is wrong, I think it escalates in a really bad way. I also don't have to agree with their perception. I don't have to agree with your perception on
That's
everything.
right.
You can have your perception that I don't have to agree with and say, you are entitled to your perception, but I'm not going to agree with your perception. That's okay. But it seems like today we won't do that.
Well, what I'm seeing today is even worse, where someone might have 12 anonymous reviewers. So they don't even know who the person is that has that false opinion and how to fix it.
Yeah.
And some leaders say, it doesn't matter who it is, start doing positive things that change everyone's perception. And what are your thoughts on the anonymous evaluations?
We talked about this once before in related to it because, and it's in the context, I'm going to put it in the context of our previous conversation and having a difficult conversation. Because what happens is we get these anonymous surveys, all the employees in the organization put their comments in, and of course people are prone to complain more than they are to put the positives. We know that, you see that, everyone sees
Everywhere.
that, right?
Yep.
For every one positive, you get 19 negative or 17 negative or 7. It started with 7, now it's much higher than that. The problem with that is it doesn't give me enough information to deal with the real problem. Let me give you an example. Let's say there's 100 employees in the company and 33 of them said all these negative things about this person, this leader, whatever the case is. So I go in and have a difficult, let's say it's you, and I come in and have a conversation and say, James, these 33 people say that you're this, I don't know who they are, but they say this, and this. You need to change all of these things. What I don't know is what if those 33 are the lowest performers in the organization? They complain about everything, yet I'm having a difficult conversation with you about something that they're not happy with you about because you drive performance and they don't want to go down the performance. I think that's stupid. Plus, I don't have an opportunity to be very specific. I don't know the real facts. Making a decision like that or having a conversation off an anonymous survey is the stupidest thing you could possibly do. I know a lot of people don't agree with that. That's my take. What's yours?
I have the same take.
Okay.
And I think I actually had a conversation with a colleague today where he had the more direct approach and the employee left.
Oh.
And, I was basically saying that's actually a positive thing. I think you want to help people, coach them, and if they aren't improving and if they aren't, after being held accountable and given opportunities, maybe it's for the best for people to leave, and it's part of addressing healthy conflict. It's not always a negative. Maybe you want to coach people up or have them naturally leave.
I think that comes back to the intent, right? So if my intent is to help them become a better version, and that means they should leave, I agree with you 100%. If my intent is to punish them, as I said earlier, I think therein lies part of the problem. But if my intent to the hard conversation is to help them become a better version of who they are, and I approach it with those kind of conversations. I approach it with the questions that you were asking. I use these Baker's Dozen questions, 13 questions that I have. I think that puts us in a much better situation.
I think, though, that employees don't always know which hat to wear. So on that example I just gave, you're coming from the client's point of view, you're not coming from, evil or bad intent. You want the client to have a good experience
Of course.
and not feel rushed at the last minute to give you things that could have been planned throughout the year.
Yeah.
So even though you're hard and direct on an employee, doesn't necessarily mean you have bad intent or you're coming from a bad place. You're just trying to do what's best for the client, but I maybe being hard and direct isn't the best way for that employee to improve. They have fear when they're confronted by a leader, and they think they better find another opportunity because they're being forced out, when really you're just being direct and don't want them to leave.
But I think you bring up a good point. If there's fear of being confronted, we shouldn't have to go right into confrontation mode, right? I mean, if somebody hits somebody, that's a different story. That's not what we're talking about. And I know you had something like that happen recently.
Yes, I did.
But I don't think we're usually talking about that type of situation. So we shouldn't have to just go and confront. My view, from a leadership perspective, is to go in, and you said this right from the get-go, go ask the questions to determine what's really going on instead of just confronting them with whatever particularly happened. Because I think we can create a situation that they get afraid of that, which is why people don't want to deal with some of these quote-unquote tough conversations in the first place. Sometimes we start that as the leader because of the way in which we did it.
Right. Now, I think you've laid out the issues well when you are the leader.
Yeah.
How would your style change if you're a subordinate to subordinate or employee that has issues with you? How would you want them to act towards you or another employee?
I think it's the same thing. I think, yeah, if let's just say we're coworkers in this space and you did something that ticked me off, I would do the same thing that you originally said. Say, hey, James, we had this conversation the other day. This is what you said. This is how I feel about what you said. And I just really want to better understand the perspective you were coming from, because this is how I took it, which may be wrong. I think you can do that to a boss, to a coworker. But if the leader, the boss, the manager, whatever, and you've seen them react to that situation before in a negative way where it was a confrontation, I probably won't do it because I'm scared crapless of them.
Exactly. So that's why I think there needs to be policies where, especially when you're in a family-owned or a company where there's not multiple leaders at a high level, you might want to be able to authorize an outside independent third party to resolve that dispute and minimize the claim that's not addressed.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a place for that. That's that mediation thing. There's a time and a place for that, for sure. And if it's before it escalates too far and you need that third party, get that third party in, because it's cheaper to deal with it and pay your fee or somebody else's fee versus it blows up because you didn't handle it the right way because you didn't have that third party to look at it. There is a time for that. For
and
sure.
Then to throw another kind of curveball in this, I don't see employees necessarily approaching you or even me, for the most part, one-on-one. They usually talk to other coworkers and get a second opinion. Am I crazy, or do you feel this way too, or this, and then it's almost like a team of people that already have been maybe biased or influenced, and they're coming at you almost collectively without you even having a chance to address it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm gonna put myself in the middle of that. Years ago, first of all, it started with nobody would address me. So anybody that was on the team, they would not have a difficult conversation. And the reason they wouldn't is because when somebody tried to bring something to me, I took it as confrontation, and I'm the louder one. I'm the one that can scream more and make the decisions, and that was my initial response. Then over time, they would come together, which was good. The fortunate thing now, I would say 80% of the time, I'm guessing on that number, they will come to me one-on-one now.
Ah.
And we've created more of the environment where it's like, Steve, can we talk about this? Because I understand your perspective, or I think I do, but I really want to better understand, because this is how that comment made me feel, or that's how, when you made that decision, here's what happened in my own mind, and I don't think that was your intent. And it's kind of like, oh crap, let's have that conversation. I'm sorry about it. And both sides now have a tendency to do that.
So how did you change that culture?
It started with me. When you were saying the thumb, thumb coming back, it was my initial response. And I would say this to leaders: if you got a situation where your team is not willing to have that conversation with you, they don't trust you. They're afraid of you.
It's trust. I think all of this healthy conflict comes down to trust. And if you trust the environment you're in, you can have that conflict and trust you're not going to get fired or demoted. But here's where I'm seeing kind of the curveballs. I get this a ton the past year is the employee, maybe because of COVID and remote work, they now post how they feel, what happened with their day on Facebook or on social media.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
what if your employee is essentially sharing their opinion about you or something you did that may be not how you felt? How do you address?
Well, again, we have that with Glassdoor. Think about that with Glassdoor. Any
Right.
organization.
That's right.
Now it's anonymous, and I think you ought to be able to confront your accuser in the
Yes.
legal space,
Yep.
but that's not what it's created for. But I will say that you can learn from every one of those. If that person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it, is that you're a tyrant, or this happened, or you didn't treat them well like this, there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, my position is that we didn't, but I understand I could have done something to create that. And even on social media, and I've had those happen to me over the years, I will respond to it and I will learn from it. I mean, I'm going to take them at their best at this point and say they're not just trying to throw me under the bus, they're trying to create change. And if that's the way I take it as the leader, then I'll take that as good, and I'll try to create change internally. If I take offense to it right off the bat and say F you and forget it and don't comment on it, what am I as a leader? I think this difficult conversation stuff comes down to who we are as leaders, co-workers, that trust piece. I agree with you.
100%. And I think an element that HR could even be more aware of is I'm going to see a huge increase in rights under the National Labor Relations Act. So a lot of people haven't thought about it, but anything you post on social media or by text or email or even orally can be considered protected union activity, even if you're in a non-unionized company. Everyone has Section 7 rights to engage in concerted activity to improve working conditions. So if a coworker likes that or comments, that could be protected speech, and we have to be careful how we can't discipline them after that type of conduct.
This is a broad brush, so don't
Yep.
all go freaking crazy over when I make a comment like this. But if you have so many team members, ex and current, that are saying so many bad things about you, your organization, your leadership, and so on online, you don't have this difficult conversation thing fixed.
Right.
I think that is a byproduct of not being able to sit down and have a real conversation with the right intent, asking the right questions, taking the ownership myself. The things that you've described,
That's right.
that I've described, and then we make we make these offhand comments and we think they're difficult conversations. Things like, "You're not going to turn that in, are you?" I mean, that's not a difficult conversation. That is an inappropriate way to deal with. If you don't like the quality of the work, have the conversation. But we take shortcuts. But my point, all that was, take a look at all your stuff online. If you're having that problem, I think you've got a situation where your team doesn't trust each other, they sure as hell don't trust you, and you don't have this difficult conversation thing nailed down.
I think you raised two great points. One is you got to continue the steps if it's not fully resolved. You can't just address it once and be done.
Right.
That doesn't work. But second, I've even seen your social media posts recently. Why don't you explain to the audience your interpretation of gaslighting and manipulation?
It's intent. Everything is about intent. I mean, it's actually between manipulation and influence. Is kind of the way that I put it out there. So as leaders, as co-workers, we want to create a relationship based on trust. So I have influence, you have influence with me. But what we have a tendency to do is our intent is to get something from the other person, so it's all about manipulation. So I'm going to go into this hard conversation, but it's because I want what I want. And I'm going to manipulate the discussion to get what I want. I think that's natural for most people, and that's a serious problem.
I agree. So you're saying that the leader needs to approach that conversation about how to help the employee achieve their goals?
I think so. Look, commonly, what do we want? We want our team to perform for me. Mm-hmm. You want your team to perform for you. And in and of itself, that's not all bad. But if that's my only intent in everything that I do, I start manipulating my team to do what I want them to do because I get something out of it. Here's my belief, and based on my own experience in the 30 years that I've done this, 22 of which I did it wrong, by the way, is really looking at it and saying, if I can help them become a better version of themselves, so when I have a difficult conversation with somebody, I want them to be better than they were, so the next situation doesn't come up. The byproduct of that is they feel more engaged, they feel happier, and guess what's going to happen? We're probably going to get the performance that we need as well, but not through manipulation, but by helping them achieve something for them. Mm-hmm. That's the same thing with these tough conversations. If it's about what I want out of it, I want blood, I'm going to get blood.
That's true. Now, I'm seeing a different point of view on leaders. How much is too transparent, or how transparent should you be to employees?
About what?
So let's say you're a low-level employee. Should you understand how the whole operation works, or should you only you need to know information to do your job?
I think that the more you can share, the better.
That's how I am too.
And the reason I believe, so, okay, if you need, first of all, the low-level employee, I don't like that term. I have a tough time. I don't think anybody's a low-level employee, because I think without any team member at any level, you can't do without them, can you?
That's right.
Can you really? So
it's the chain.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But what if they know their job, but they don't understand the context of their job and the impact that it has on the overall organization? Yeah, I know what I need to do. I know what my focus is, but I have no idea how it ties up in the rest of the organization. You know, Simon Sinek talks about the power of why and all this other stuff, which is true. There's a certain why for all of us, and it's different for all of us. But if my why is only because I was told because it's just my department versus I know how my department affects this organization, affects our clients and so on, am I going to be more apt to do my job because I know the whole picture? Not everyone will. Or am I going to be more apt to do my job just because I know what my job is? I think the picture. Personal opinion.
I think the picture always helps. And I think it's more rewarding to understand how you're helping the community and the overall big picture. But how do you articulate the purpose beyond generating revenue or helping clients?
It doesn't have to be this big pie in the sky type of thing, right? I mean, if your purpose is to deliver the best level of service to your client by doing X, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think it has to be saving the world and saving the planet and saving the, those are all great purposes if they're truly your business. But in my business, our business is about helping companies put people at the center of their business, period.
Yep.
That's what it is. It's not some big altruistic, we're going to change the planet, we're going to save the, we're not doing that. That's not why people come here. They could go somewhere else for that, but that's not why people come here.
So you hear a lot about doing, assessments and personality traits and various things. Is it ever your conclusion that maybe they're both acting fine, they see the world a different way and they're not the right fit?
Yeah, so in having conversations, difficult conversations ties right into that. Yes, I do believe if you have some behavioral data on somebody, you can approach them in a difficult conversation much better, much better. But does that sometimes support the fact that they shouldn't be there? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make them a bad person though. It just says in the context of what we've created, the team that we have, this is going to be difficult for both parties. There's already been some other challenges. There's already been some other difficult conversations. This shouldn't be the thing. A behavioral assessment shouldn't be the thing that makes the decision. But if it feeds and it supports what's going on, then okay, it's time to make a change.
So if somebody doesn't have the skill set to interact well with you, they're not creating healthy conflict, would you assign them a manager that could deal with that in a healthy way because they're otherwise skilled, especially in a talent shortage? Or would you say, if you can't work with me, it's probably best to move on?
Style and skill are completely different.
Okay.
And if we want a bunch of people that act like us, just get along with us, they're not going to challenge us. You will not be challenged in your organization. I think you ought to have people that challenge you in your organization, cause healthy conflict, if you want to call it, have that. And if they're better off aligned with somebody else who can nurture them to be the best level that they could be versus me, take it, man. Not a problem. Now, I'm not suggesting go make an open position for them on somebody else's team that doesn't exist. But if there's a better alignment, absolutely. Shouldn't be all about just the one leader.
Sure.
Otherwise, they all look, act, feel, say, talk, stop. Everything's like me. What's the point?
That's my approach as well.
Yeah.
So employees, do you think with the power shift, is there such a thing as employees having too much power or feeling too entitled that we as leaders need to do anything to balance that?
Yeah, I mean, is there such thing as too much power? Well, I think any one person can have too much power. Doesn't matter who it is, right? I don't subscribe to the fact that the employees have more power, the team members have more power now than they had. I think they've always had power, and leaders have always had power. What I think has happened is it's become more obvious and more vocal about it, where the team members are taking to social to talk about the power. They do have more options right now. But I think it still comes down to the relationship they have with people in the organization and the leadership. Things like, the freedom to do what I need to do to take care of my kid. That's always been there. Always been there. Whether you're remote, whether you're not remote is irrelevant. And I think having the relationship with your team to have that conversation about what's acceptable, what's not, will get you halfway there. I have a hard time saying that all the controls in the hands of people that it wasn't in control. I think they always had the control. I do.
I think they have even more control given there's allegedly 2 million, job shortage openings right now, that we're probably more dependent on them and would suffer more without employees than maybe in past times.
Same thing that happened in 2008. Think about just before everything, everybody's like, oh my gosh, there's 2 or 3 million more jobs open than there are people that are out there. And that's valid. It's a supply and demand issue. That's always going to happen. And does it shift the control a little bit? Sure. But it doesn't change the basic principles, I don't believe. If I don't have a relationship with you as my team member, you have all the control and you can leave. If I have a relationship with you, you trust me, I trust you, I'll have a difficult conversation with you, you'll have a difficult conversation with me. It now becomes what's in the best interest of both parties, and it's not just holding it over your, hey, I got 10 more jobs that I can go to. Well, okay, great. If that's the right thing for you, go. But when we have that kind of relationship, I think it minimizes the challenges that we're seeing now. What I think has happened is leaders and their teams do not have the trust, do not know how to have a conversation. So what's the team doing? I'm out of here because I can, instead of dealing with the issue. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think there's 2 kind of major takeaways, and one is addressing the problem without a formal complaint. If you hear gossip, you hear a joke, you see something on social media, not just Steve, all employees, even if you're any level employee, all team members need to address it. It's all of our responsibilities to create a healthy environment. Yeah. And I think, second, we need to make sure that we are continuing to do additional steps as needed to resolve the problem.
Yeah.
But I think that we are, because of the tight demand and job market, we're giving people non-merit-based raises and increases, no doubt. And I think those employees that are going way above and way beyond don't feel distinguished enough, and they're kind of, I think that's creating kind of the bad will, and I want to hear your thoughts about that.
Where do we spend the most of our time as leaders in an organization or HR? With the problems.
Problems.
We spend 80% of our time with the bottom 20%.
Yep.
Worst mathematics you could possibly do. We should be spending 80% of our time with the top 20%, I believe, right? Because they're the ones that you think, oh, if I leave them alone, they're just going to do what I do. But then I give everybody the exact same raise, or you give everybody the exact same raise, and that top 20% leaves because we're focusing all of our efforts on the bottom 20%. I'm not suggesting to skip them. If they're capable, give them the tools, have the tough conversation with them. But we've got to be there to support our top performers, because we're seeing more top performers leave organizations
That's what I'm seeing.
than ever before. But I think it's because of a disconnect, not just because they're all being treated the same, but because the leaders are spending so much time on that bottom 20%, the trust and the relationship with that particular top performer isn't there anymore. That's what I'm seeing.
I'm seeing the same thing. I actually heard, I think it's Patrick Lencioni said, his prediction of 2022 is all of the great employees are going to join great organizations.
Agreed.
There's going to be a big continued shift this year.
Yeah, people say it's not about the money and people are looking for all these other things. I think it's always been that way. Money solves some of those problems temporarily, so you got this huge influx. The market right now is saying there's an inflation in salaries. We know that across the board. But it's so, man, they go to great organizations, they're going to make great organizations even greater. And what's the rest of the companies going to do? They're going to be left with what's left.
I'm believing those visions to be a reality. I think a lot of companies, this is your time to make your company either shine or sink.
Yeah, I think we're coming up on our time. So we've got comments like, you can lose trust really quick with emotional feedback versus understanding the situation. So we respond emotionally, not dealing with the facts, then going to feelings-focused fruit. Starts at the top. I mean, there's a common theme here. Like, difficult conversations, I think, and you can close on this, James, and then we'll wrap up, is I think difficult conversations don't have to be as difficult as we make them, being number one. I think if we do them with the right intent and we have the right structure, and I do believe that you had some things on that structure, I had some things on that structure that if you're a leader, you need to take that to heart. Yes, you want to deal with the issue, but you want to deal with the issue the right way so it lasts.
And I would add to that you can't just assume just because someone's in a leadership position, they have all the training that we've had.
Agreed.
So you have to, before you, I guess, confront them or challenge them or, have that difficult conversation, think, do we as leaders provide the training and the tools and the resources to allow them to do their job successfully? And have we identified, where they should spend their time? Are we rewarding them on their leadership? Or is it just the bottom line? Does their job description mention about being a leader and managing people?
We do a lot of leadership training, and I would say 80% of the leaders that have gone through some of our training, they have never been taught how to deal with difficult conversations. Not because they're bad people, not because they can't do it. They've never been taught how to do it. And when you go beyond to the non-leadership roles where they should be having the conversation together, I think the percentage is probably even higher.
And if you get to the legal side, guess what the first question a plaintiff attorney or the EEOC is going to ask?
Training.
Yeah. And if the answer is none, they're going to not trust that organization and assume you're guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of folks that are saying the same thing on social as well, but I think we're at our time. James, it was great. I mean, I think
this is fun.
It's not only fun, but I think people need to realize that they've got to address some of these tough conversations a little bit differently and stop referring to them as difficult conversations. They don't have to be.
I say that 90% of all conflict is healthy conflict, and it could be as high as closer to 100% if you have the tools to address that conflict in the right way. This quote, Steve Jobs says, I don't want to hire people to tell them what to do. You want to hire people to share their ideas and tell you how to get better. And I think if we focus it on that purpose, we can solve a lot of conflict.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Thank you to all of you that have been watching, whether you're on Zoom, LinkedIn, Facebook, or any of the places that we're live. If you've got some additional thoughts, some additional questions, I'd be happy to come on board again. James, I know you would be open to having the conversation again.
I think a lot of people are going to realize maybe their CEO starts at the top, doesn't have all of this training and skill set, and we'd love to focus on that solution.
And if you're here locally especially, we can do this remote because we do this all over the country, but if you're here locally and you want to join us to have a conversation like this, share your perspective on whether it's difficult conversations or some of the others that we may have discussion about in the future, please reach out to us. Let us know. James and I would love to have you on board here. And you don't have to agree with us.
No, not at all. And we welcome your ideas and input. Please add in the comments, any other takeaways or thoughts that you have as well.
Well, James, again, thanks for taking the time. Thank you, everybody, for joining Leadership in Legal Live. In all transparency, we do not know when we're going to do the next one. We've had too much of a break. I think we both agree that it needs to be done a little more often given the topics that we need to address, and we'll come back to you with what that might look like in the future. Thanks for joining us.
And if you have a topic, please add in the comments what you'd like to hear us take a deeper dive on as well.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
bud.
Thanks,
We'll
Steve.
see you. Thanks, everybody.
Happy New Year.